For the first 3 steps of this video, you're going to want to focus on the winch so you can set the kit aside. In step 1, remove the 2 screws that hold the end cap of the winch to the motor plate. In step 2, you want to remove the 2 tiny screws that hold the end cap to the center support of the winch. In step 3, you want to remove all of your winch line from the winch spool so that you can access the grub screw that holds the line to the spool. This is where you're left after the first 3 steps. You'll want to set all these parts aside and move to the kit at this point. Go ahead and open your kit. Try not to lose any parts. Make sure you have all of the parts that are listed in the instructions. And we do have a PDF with a full set of instructions on the product page, if you prefer still pictures to a video. Step 4 in the overall process is going to be to insert bushing A into end cap B. This is end cap B. This is the new end cap. It is different from the stock end cap. You can tell because there's a hole in the side, and internally it is different as well. Get this bushing into the end cap, seated as best as you can. I like to use one of our 3mm sockets to try to get this pushed down in there. If you can't get it pushed down in there all the way right now, it's fine. It'll usually just snap in place though. Step 5 is to insert the bearing that we provide into the end cap that we provide. Make sure it is fully seated. Step 6 is to insert center pin E into your new spool, part number D, so that the narrow end is exposed in the groove on top of the spool, and that your pinhole is exposed. You may notice that on this spool there is just a little bit of flashing that's left here in the end. Not a big deal. Just poke it out of the way with anything. You can use an X-Acto knife, screwdriver, whatever. You will want to check to make sure there is no other debris in your spool. That's going to help you later on when you're setting up the functional part of the free spool. The next thing you need to do is get your spring pin, and we do provide a spare in case one shoots across the room or you just mangle one. But you'll want to get your spring pin inserted into the hole on this center pin. To do this, usually what I like to do, hey, don't run away from me, bad part. What I like to do is take one end of it and just pinch it down a little bit. You don't have to go crazy, but that's going to help it go into the center slot just a little bit more easily. So now it's sitting in there part of the way by itself. Then you just press it in with the pliers like that a little bit, and you'll see it starting to come through on the other side. Now there's lots of different ways you can insert spring pins and all sorts of different tools and all of that. Honestly, I just keep going with the needle nose. I kind of get a little bit cockeyed like that, and I just use it to press it in just a little bit. You want it to be centered. If you have to go back and forth a little bit, you're not going to hurt anything. But I'm happy with that. You can see at the top, it does not go outside of that diameter. It does not do it on the bottom either. This should be good. I'm happy. For step 8, we're going to slide one of the 4 washers part G onto the center pin. For step 9, we're going to slide the return spring, part H, onto the center pin. So now, this is what we have. So now you're going to want to slide this whole chunk into this part. Pretty easy. The only hard part can be making sure you get your center pin kind of lined up with the end there. Or making sure that you do it on camera. For step 11, you're going to want to use one of the M2 screws that we provide to hold everything in place. We started by hand. Now this screw is going to be what you use to engage and disengage the free spool. So if you find that your fingers can't get around there, it's just too hard, you can always put a longer screw on. You don't have to use the exact one that we include. I like to screw mine in just a little bit, make it snug. On the other end of the winch, I guess the remaining parts, you're going to want to remove the spool that's on there if you haven't done that already. Sometimes it comes right off. Since I'm filming, of course it's not going to come right off. Why would it? You bastard. A little bit of encouragement with a screwdriver should get this thing off. Garbage. Now we can go to step 12, which is to slide the bearing, part number J, onto the shaft of the motor. Now you just need to slide this side onto this side. Note where the flat part is on your center pin and try to line it up with the shaft on the motor. There you go. Now you will want to reinstall the 2 super tiny screws that you removed in one of the first 3 steps. Now you'll want to use the original screws that you removed. Again, it was step 1 or 2 in the bottom to get everything lined back up. The last step is to get your winch line reinstalled in the spool. Now this actually can be easier to do before you install the spool, but it really depends on the winch line. I find this 3 racing winch line to be actually more difficult than the others. And we don't have a grub screw or a set screw or anything to hold the winch line on. The hole is pretty small though, so all you really need to do is just tie a little knot in it. Of course, you also probably want to thread the winch line through the fair lead first before you attach it if you're going to reuse the 3 racing winch line. Otherwise, you'll have to pull the line right back out, take this knot off, and start the process all over again. Now we can go ahead, install power, and test the free spool function to make sure it works. I won't get into the electronic side of this because everyone's setup is different, but let's go ahead and give this a test. There are a lot of different things that you want to look for when you're testing the winch. And if you go to use the winch for the first time and you find that the spool and everything feels jammed, pull this in and out a couple of times. See if you can get it to loosen up. You may need to go back and add a washer in between the spool and the motor right here. Now on this winch, it feels pretty locked up to me, so that's the first thing that I'm going to do. I went ahead and added a washer in between the spool and the motor plate, and it's hard to see on camera, but there is just a little bit of space in there, so this should turn a little bit more freely now. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're testing the free spool function, if you have wound your winch line in all the way so that it's so tight up against your fair lead, it's going to be difficult to get this screw to pull out, thereby releasing the free spool. So one thing that I really like to do is run one of our winch savers. It's a little rubber part that helps provide a little bit of elasticity to the whole setup. But here's how the free spool basically works. When you pull this out, it allows you to just pull line out. When you let go of the screw and it snaps in place like that, then you can provide power and it will reel all of the line back in. Of course, as I was talking about, if you let it go in too far, it's going to be really tight against there. So sometimes when I go to free spool, I have to just give this a little bit of a tug. That way it's nice and loose and I can pull this back out. Another thing that I found on this particular unit while I was polishing everything is that one of these screws is actually sticking up above the motor plate. If that's the case on yours, make sure you tighten it down all the way, and if you have to, it's not going to hurt anything to just take a little bit off the head of that screw so that you have a nice smooth surface here right next to the spool. You can actually see on this spool where that screw was rubbing. If you're really lucky like me, you've purchased one of these fantastic cordless tools off of Amazon that has so much torque, I'm almost afraid to use it on here. If you find that your whole winch seems to be smiling at you, you can go ahead and try to back off these two screws to see if that helps you pull everything down. In my case, I'm noticing that I can still really see this motor plate a whole lot. So I think while I was getting everything installed, I may have bunched up one of the wires back here in the motor, because really, this plate should be pushed in a lot further. On this particular unit, I found that the balls of solder on the motor were grotesquely huge, so I went ahead and used my super tool. That's what we're going to call this. In fact, I'm going to make a new nameplate for it. I went ahead and used my super tool to grind off the tops of the solder. Hopefully that'll help everything slide back together. No, that still doesn't have this motor plate pushed in quite as far as I want. And the last thing that I noticed is that this part of the winch seems to be pointing up. I wonder if that's why this whole thing looks like it's smiling at me when I finish assembly. I think the best thing that I can do with this unit is to slightly loosen these screws just to give everything a little bit of play. Now, once I put the other end cap on here, this is all going to be held in place really well anyway. And I don't really find that having these two screws loosened enough to make this parallel with the winch plate is going to hurt anything. Now that I've got this all back together, the pin moves much more freely, and so does the spool. Of course, in this case, there is one problem. I put the plate on backwards. Think anybody will notice? And remember, like I said, no matter how good you get everything lined up, if you have an insane amount of tension on the winch line against your fair lead, it's going to be really hard to pull this screw out. I'd say that this one now works pretty well. I can pull it out, pull out the line, and when I let go and apply power, it sucks itself back in. So there you have it. That's everything I think you need to know for the Commando winch system kit. If you have any questions, please let us know. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing. Not sure if you want to subscribe yet? Check out one of these videos. Thank you for watching.